I just want to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Kern. I'm a senior correspondent with the Capitol Forum. I cover competition, AI, and tech news on Capitol Hill. And we have a really great panel today. We're talking about AI and energy and how the massive AI consumption of energy is leading to some really interesting policy debates in DC, but also in a lot of state governments. So we're going to tackle some of the biggest issues here, and then we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So just introducing, to my left, we have Lindsay Baxter Griffith, the CEO of Clean Tomorrow, and she can tell you a little bit about that group as well. It's newer. Steve Del Bianco, President and CEO of NetChoice. Tanya Das, Vice President of Strategy at Data Array. Is that right?
Data Array.
Data Array. I said it wrong. Okay. And she can tell you more about that group as well. And Marsden Hanna, Head of Energy and Sustainability Policy at Google. So to start off, there's been a big growing concern about the perception that data centers are driving up electricity bills. I wanted to see if each of you could walk through, from your perspective, how this is playing out in your field and who really pays for these new grid upgrades when large tech facilities come to town and build new data centers, and how you deal with that challenge of demand for energy from AI data centers. So you could start, Lindsay.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro, Rebecca. My name's Lindsay Baxter Griffith. I'm the founder and CEO of Clean Tomorrow. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan group operating around the country. We do a lot of work on state policy, in particular on siting and permitting in the electricity grid space. So actually just last week, we released a report called the Power Policy Playbook, which actually takes a look around the country at different strategies and policy that states and local leaders are taking to address exactly this question. So look, large grid assets and industrial users are nothing new to the grid, but we are at a very interesting moment. There's an increasing amount of demand coming on, in part from this use of AI and new data centers. We also have the challenge of a grid that's in desperate need of additional investment. We've deferred and defrayed the costs of upgrading our grid infrastructure for many years, and now that bill is coming home to roost at the same time as we have this new demand. And state policymakers are really at the crux of how to deal with this question. There's lots of things they can do. The opportunity that new data centers and new industrial users presents is also an opportunity, I think, to leverage better investment, more strategic investment in the grid. So those state policymakers are thinking about how can we allow for microgrids? How can we potentially provide additional investment and have some of the upgrade costs needed around the system paid for by these new partnerships? There's a whole lot of things. I'd encourage you to check out our report on our website, cleantomorrow.org. And I'm very excited about today's conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Steve Del Bianco, president of NetChoice, trade association for the tech industry. Our simple mission is to try to make the internet safe for free enterprise and free expression. And for decades, that's been a big deal. But when you think about it, we're focusing on AI so much, and yet for the past decade, we've been building new data centers, not for AI, but to support the movies, music, videos, messages, streaming services, AWS cloud service, cloud business services from Google. All of that has been done on the cloud, and the cloud lives in a big white building about the size of an aircraft carrier called a data center. And we have them all over the country. And over the past several years, our industry has had to build about one of those on average every week to keep up with the demand, because all those things that you're doing in the cloud, hardly any of you ever delete your old photos and videos and messages. So we are having to build a lot of data centers even before AI showed up. And AI has changed the conversation. It's the same big white building full of racks of servers, but on servers that have an NVIDIA chip or an inference chip, it's going to consume 7 to 10 times as much electricity. It needs higher cooling because of the heat generated by that. So from the outside, it just looks like yet another data center, but it will be spinning the electrical meter much faster than a data center that you're using for your Facebook photos and videos. So you asked the question, Rebecca, with respect to electrical prices. So let's just look backwards over those last 5 years. The Department of Energy just concluded a relatively detailed study of what has happened to electricity prices around the country. And in the years 2019 to 2024, the areas of the country with a lot of data centers, Virginia and Arizona, think of Ohio, Texas, they have experienced, ready for this, declining electricity prices for 5 years, adjusted for inflation. Declining. So the places with the most data centers have had lower electricity rates. Simple reason. The electricity bills that you and I see have a component for how many electrons we burn, but also a component for our share of the fixed costs of the utility. Well, when you have a large load customer like a data center, they're going to absorb far more of the fixed costs than all of us. And for that reason, rates have come down. But I don't want you to rely on the past. Look ahead. I think everyone here can agree that the public utilities commissions in every state are chartered by law to prohibit any utility from shifting costs from a large customer to anyone else. So the track record has been superb. And looking ahead, the law will ensure that when our industry comes in to build a data center, our costs are not shifted onto anyone else.
Yeah.
So I am VP of Strategy with an AI for Science startup called Data Array. And I want to bring the perspective of putting the current AI moment in context, where we are right now, and thinking about how this could evolve going forward. So when it comes to Data Array, our startup is focused on solving and unlocking the data problem to enable AI-enabled scientific discovery. In order to have AI deployment in various sectors across our economy, we're going to have to go beyond LLMs. There's a ton of data available across our world, and most of that data is not language. And LLMs are the types of models that have been dominating the conversation, I think to some degree, energy use as well when it comes to AI energy use. But moving forward, as we start to develop more sector-specific applications for AI, I believe that's going to start to change. And the company that I'm working with is helping to automatically curate and clean up scientific data to make that ready for input into AI models to accelerate that AI-enabled scientific discovery process. So when it comes to the future of energy use in our nation, if we zoom in on the AI piece, I believe things are going to start shifting in some interesting ways. There's a very good chance that we are going to still need these massive AI models for other sectors of the economy. They may be language-based, they may be based on other types of data, but we're talking about things like having a foundational model for physics or a foundational model for chemistry. Those are really big ideas and really big concepts and may require similar levels of training and inference as we're seeing for some of these large language models right now. However, when we start to get more narrow, we might see some more bespoke, tailored applications for subfields like material science or biology, in which we are using bespoke models developed based on specific scientific instruments, and that may lead to some shifting in the energy use. And so when it comes to the future of what AI energy use is going to look like, I'd say a lot of it is unknown at this moment. We're definitely in a moment of growth right now, but 5 or 10 years out, I think it's really hard to predict what that's going to look like. But I'm really excited to be part of an organization and part of a movement where we're trying to bring those benefits of AI to more sectors of the economy to make sure that the AI revolution is seeing benefits across the board.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Marcin Hinna with Google. At Google, we are very bullish and excited about the potential for AI to help accelerate economic growth, scientific advancement, and human health and welfare. Some studies estimate that once AI is fully diffused across the economy, it has the potential to bring something like $4 trillion in uplift to North American GDP. But we don't get the upside of AI without the energy to power it. And as we look at the grid today, we are seeing significant difficulties with interconnecting new data centers to meet load growth, largely as a result of congestion and fragmentation across the grid. And as we look at this opportunity and bringing new resources online, it's incredibly important that data centers pay for the incremental cost that is needed to build out the grid to serve their capacity. And that's something we're committed to do at Google. Steve, as Steve mentioned earlier, contrary to what folks might think, the large load growth actually helps reduce the cost of the grid for everyone else as you spread the fixed cost of the system across a larger number of megawatt hours. Just to put a couple examples on that, PG&E in California has estimated that for every gigawatt of new incremental data center growth that they see in the market, they expect residential retail bills to go down by 1% to 2%. in Georgia, the PSC chair credited the ability to freeze rates for everyone directly to the ability to the growing data center growth in that market. So as we look to ensure that electricity rates are affordable, large load growth can be a really important part of the solution. And it's really important that us as data center companies pay for the incremental cost to serve. So we're committed to do that through what we're calling our capacity commitment framework. This means significant upfront minimum charges. It means long-term contracts. It means upfront collateral so that if the data center load growth never appears and the utility has made an investment in the grid, we know that other ratepayers aren't left holding the bag because these companies have committed upfront to pay for capital delivered upfront. So that's a structure that I think is now inked in with the state PUCs in 8 states, and we're looking to continue to expand that. There's lots more to come on this front. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I do feel like there is this perception that electricity bills are going up. And I mean, I'm seeing it here in our region too. So can you explain how it actually works, Mars, like the connecting, because there's a long-term process in building out these data centers. And also there's a shortage of transmission interconnectors and a backlog in those on the market. So can you talk about some of the challenges getting connected to the grid and how that maybe ties to prices and also some legislative solutions you're looking to in Congress?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, as we look at the market, transmission congestion is really the primary barrier to bringing on new capacity. We're hearing utilities tell us 5 years, sometimes 10 years to interconnect new load. We had one utility tell us 12 years to study the timeline to interconnect. So it's really this grid fragmentation that is making it difficult to bring on new supply at the pace of the AI revolution. So what can we do about that? A couple different things. First, high-performance conductors. These are larger, bigger, better transmission wires that can replace old, out-of-date wires. You can simply restring an existing line with a higher performance conductor. This can be done for a fraction of the cost that will be required to build a new line. It can be done in a matter of months, not years, on an existing right-of-way, and it could potentially double the capacity of these lines. But utilities don't have a financial incentive to deploy these solutions. So this is an area where we need public policy to help optimize the incentives and ensure we're making the most use of the infrastructure that we have. On top of that, building new infrastructure is going to be important to create an American grid that can power growth. An interstate, large regional or interregional transmission line currently takes anywhere from 10 to 15 years just to permit before you get to the construction phase. It's 3 years to build, but 10 to 15 years to permit. And that is a result of just this Byzantine permitting framework that at all levels, local, state, federal, and just real challenges with figuring out how we apportion the costs for these lines. And so as we look at the market, the federal permitting reform conversation we think is really important. We're very pleased to see the SPEED Act pass in the House, which will help expedite NEPA timelines. But on top of that, we need a permitting solution that helps expedite our ability to build regional transmission. And that means a federal backstop to build a national robust infrastructure network. A lot can be done on existing rights of way, and there's many other considerations, but we're really excited about the potential for something here this year.
And Steve, do you want to comment on any of the legislative efforts?
Well, I'd like to get to, that was your next question, but on this one, that same Department of Energy study that just came out identified 3 reasons why in some parts of the country rates have gone up over that 5-year period. The first thing they talked about was aging infrastructure. The fact that we have such a backlog at upgrading the infrastructure. We have underinvested in certain regions at the utility. You couple that with the second reason, weather events, because it's weather events that damage the distribution network, not so much the generation side. And the third identified reason from the Department of Energy was renewable portfolio standards, under which utilities were forced to retire fossil fuel baseload and nuclear baseload and to rely more on renewables to fill that in. But looking ahead, that does not provide the baseload 24/7, 365 power that we need to power this nation's economy and the data centers and AI that we have. Unless we can couple renewables with a generous battery storage business, we are going to find ourselves reliant on interregional spot market of buying power. So at times when you need power and your generation capacity doesn't get there and the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, you have to buy. So the North American Reliability Corporation, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, just described the resource mix challenges. On transmission projects that Mars was just speaking of, half of the projects, 400 out of 900, are delayed for supply chain disruptions and permitting obstacles, and that the interregional transfers themselves are only about 4% of the investment and development that our utilities are doing. So precious little is being done to connect the parts of our country that have excess power to those that need it. And those spot prices, Rebecca, could be why sometimes your bills go up.
I just want to add one thing here. I think the other factor I just want to add to Steve's list is the price of natural gas. There was a rise during COVID that led to an increase in utility bills around the country, particularly as we use more gas for generation purposes on the electric grid. Those prices did not come down when natural gas prices declined, and they're now at quite a low price today, but it's volatile. And so that's an additional contributing factor here. But in complete agreement, I mean, congestion costs are about transmission. And in 2022, the cost of congestion to American consumers was over $20 billion. That was the high point. We're not going to get away from this issue until we start building more than 55 miles of transmission, which is what we built in 2023. So there is an absolute need for this federal authority. We need state policymakers and regional cooperation to improve on this. In markets like in PJM, you can see the sort of panic and also experimentation that's now happening with policy there. If you care about building large infrastructure in this country that's going to take energy, like in the AI sector, you have to care about transmission.
Have you guys taken a stance on any legislation federally or in the states?
Yeah, around the country in just the last few years, there's been a lot of pushes at the state level to reform siting and permitting policy. So while, the federal backstop is important, most of these decisions, most of the permits that are faced on the grid are at the local or state level. So that's where we've been tracking this. And of hundreds of bills, unfortunately, almost half of them look at restricting permitting and siting. So we have to continue to push uphill on this issue locally. We need to get states the authority that's necessary to make these decisions, to make them efficiently, expediently, to work with local communities, yes, but provide certainty in the business environment so that we can build these projects at the speed and scale that they're necessary, which is, again, huge.
And would you guys support the SPEED Act, like NEPA reform?
Very much so. I think it's important, but I think when we look around the country, again, federal projects where you need federal permits are important. But again, one of the issues we have is that the reconductoring, upgrading of transmission at the local level, improving substations to serve projects, and as states look at these questions, they need to think about permitting and siting in their own state. We're working on things like digitalization of permitting processes. So many states still use paper to do permitting and siting. We really have to catch up. I'm optimistic that we can continue to make progress, but large infrastructure is a challenge to build, right? And you need decision makers that are committed to the economic opportunity that can be in their states if they build these projects, while also making sure that you can provide high quality decision making, right? Whether it's a renewable project, a battery project, a nuclear project, you need to have the opportunity in place for communities, decision makers, industry to work collaboratively and quickly to get us where we need to be at scale.
I think another challenge is resistance from local communities. There's been some protests from communities claiming there's concerns over water shortages and electricity rate issues when building a new data center in their community. How are tech companies working with these communities locally to allay these concerns? And also, I'd be interested, Lindsay, if you guys are working on the local level with communities too.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that state policymakers and local policymakers can work with communities. We hear a lot about community benefit agreements, hear a lot about local decision-making industry-led conversations. What we really need across all of those is approaches that are going to provide, again, certainty of timelines where people know where they have the opportunity to contribute to the process, and certainty that there'll be a decision made, right, moving forward. This is no different than any other type of infrastructure project, but you have to have high quality decision making means, again, accurate timelines, realistic policy decisions. There will be, I think, increasing amounts of legislation on both sides of this issue. I think we're going to see states, especially as they hear from the AI industry and from data center build, that there is a necessary conversation that needs to be had in increasingly higher levels of government to make these decisions and lay out processes. There's lots of really interesting options out there. For example, Michigan has a finance option where they will assist in payment with industry and with communities, provide additional incentives. We see a lot of those tax benefits really work for communities. And I'll just back to where I started. We need this opportunity to really result in investment in the grid that has been long deferred, right? And so that's where policymakers and the interests of the AI and data center community need to come together. So I think if that sort of planning and that sort of policy can be made successfully at the state level, we will see success, we will see economic opportunity, and we'll see communities more excited and more on side. That's what it's going to take. It's really meeting people where they are and providing the incentives and the opportunity to them today.
Yeah, NetChoice is effective because we get the hell out of Washington. My team and I are constantly in the states and at local county commissioner meetings. And that's where we have observed firsthand what Rebecca brought up, the NIMBY problem, not in my backyard, just in the past 4 weeks. And what I've discovered showing up at a planning and zoning hearing in rural Kentucky or Indianapolis 2 weeks ago and last week in South Dakota is that it isn't just NIMBY, not in my backyard, it's banana, which means build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And when we talk, there's even worse form of that called nope, not on planet Earth. Where does this come from? It turns out that there's a general fear and uncertainty about technology and about business. And a lot of America's population on the far left and far right have joined together in the bottom, and they distrust the business community. They distrust the media, and they especially distrust the government. So they can't believe their rates are going to go down if we build a data center. They can't believe that the noise will be tolerable or that we won't vacuum up all of their farmland and virtually tile the earth as a result. And they get their information not from journals and articles like a DOE study, they get their information on social media, which is stored in the data center, as a finding irony. But all of that echo chamber is about distrust. Very challenging for us to overcome that distrust. Mostly what we can do is keep calmly pointing out, no, in Saline County, Michigan, even though the state has some incentives, Saline County has decided they don't want a $10 billion data center being built by OpenAI. A data center that uses no water at all for cooling. And yet, 2 of every 3 objections at the town hall meetings were about water use or concerns about electricity without any basis in fact. So at that point, the audience is not just the public who's distrusting the people giving them the message. The audience is usually the county commissioners and the state lawmakers. For instance, when they hear somebody stood up last week in South Dakota and said, Northern Virginia is suffering from digital smog that is costing people years off their life. I said, Representative, could you explain further? And she suggested that digital smog hangs over Northern Virginia. And I didn't know really where to go with that one, except to say I live in Northern Virginia and we've got a lot of problems there, but smog's not one of them. Week before in Indianapolis, a group of people in t-shirts went up to the state legislative commission at a hearing and said, diabetes rates are increasing in areas around data centers. And they pointed to Northern Virginia as a place where diabetes is going crazy. Well, fortunately, the lawmakers at that panel, they don't buy that. They ask for data. Is there any studies? They don't buy that. But the folks in the room who don't want change and don't trust us, they will rally to a cry as crazy as that. So we have a lot of work left to do, and a lot of it is showing people that you can trust it. These Kentucky lawmakers, I'll wrap this up, sorry, but these Kentucky lawmakers, in this case, a planning commission, decided to get in a van and drive an hour and a half north to Ohio, outside of Columbus, Ohio, and look at a few data centers that were already running. They didn't hear any noise. They saw a relatively interesting building of 2 stories high in prairie land in central Ohio. They talked to locals who were ecstatic over the jobs, investment, and tax relief. Well, they got in their van, they came back to Kentucky and right away passed an ordinance to allow data centers in northern Kentucky. So seeing is believing, and I think we're going to have to rely on that.
I mean, Mars, are you seeing it firsthand as well? Do you interact with communities in your role? at Google?
I think Lindsay and Steve covered it pretty well, so I don't have a ton to add, but certainly I'll say it's incredibly important that we are a robust partner to the communities that we are part of. One way we've done that is focused on top of paying for the energy required to service our data centers. We're helping support affordability through energy efficiency funds and weatherization. We did a $25 million grant in Arkansas, $30 million in Texas to help people weatherize their homes. And we're helping train the next generation of electricians as well. In Texas, we have a partnership with the Electrical Training Alliance to train 1,700 electricians that can help bring local jobs. So it's an important part of being a community member.
And Tanya, I want to bring you in because your group is working on the front end of the AI ecosystem and helping researchers get access to AI-ready data sets. And could you talk about how the nature of AI energy usage is going to be changing as the tools become more tailored in their use and we have other systems besides just LLMs, more of the edge AI computing possibilities?
Yes, it's a very difficult piece to predict, but there is a chance that energy use may actually decline in the future for several reasons. Energy use due to AI. When it comes to the large language models right now, those models may become more efficient. And so their training and inference may become more efficient, and that could lead to some improvements. But specifically, as we were talking about, when it comes to deploying AI in more sectors across the economy, those deployments, I believe, are going to require more tailored AI solutions. Instead of throwing like the entire data of the entire internet into a model, we're going to be more tailored about what we're feeding into those models and what the outcomes of those models are going to be. And so we might also see more deployment of AI, as you said, on the edge, which means that these models, instead of running on a data center, are going to be running on our smartphones, which use a lot less energy than a data center. And so there's a lot of reason, I think, to be optimistic about what the trends are going to look like. And there's possibility that a lot of energy efficiency and improvements will be made in the future because of all these different reasons.
So we're seeing this administration take different approaches to AI energy challenges. One we saw last month was the Trump administration asked regional grid operator PJM to require tech companies to pay for new transmission and energy sources connecting in this market. But there's a bit of an outcry to that push. And I wanted to see your perspective. Is it that simple of a solution? And obviously all these RTOs operate different and have different energy composition of their generation sources. And then we have ERCOT, which is Texas, which is not connected to the grid at all. And we saw that failure, not this past winter storm, but in a few years ago. It was really challenging for them. So what are your thoughts about these top-down directions from the administration to RTOs telling them what to do?
I can start. I'll just say first, we are encouraged by the administration's support for U.S. AI leadership. We think this is very important for America's global competitive position in the world. And we know that, of course, energy supply is a critical input to achieving that outcome. When we look at the RTO challenges, certainly there's no one size fits all, but the common thread across the RTOs we're seeing is the transmission congestion challenge that's making it difficult to bring on new capacity. And that is having sort of cascading effects throughout the system. In some places, that's part of the reason you're seeing capacity market prices go up in PJM. But there's another really important reason we're seeing the load growth demand go up so much. And there is a significant amount of what I guess we would call phantom load in the system, where interconnection requests are not backed by firm financial commitments. Just as one example of this, there is a utility in PJM that was projecting 60 gigawatts of new data center capacity. Once that utility brought on a large load tariff that required customers to put their money where their mouth is, to sign up for long-term contracts, to sign up for upfront collateral and significant charges to ensure they're not shifting costs to other customers. Once they brought on that structure, the demand forecast dropped by 75%. And so part of what we're seeing is there's just tremendous amount of speculation in the market that is flowing through to prices and creating a lot of froth and churn. And so going forward, and I think we saw this in the administration's partnership with PJM, is making sure that large loads, if you are going to ask the utility to make an investment to serve you, you should be committing financially to do that. So you are ensuring you're not burdening other customers.
Yeah, it's funny that when you think of these top-down mandates, whether it's from the administration to PJM or for the state legislature to all the local districts, it's got symbolic value. It isn't going to change the calculus because remember, the Public Utilities Commission that regulate every utility are prohibited by law from allowing a utility to transfer Mars's costs to anyone on this panel. They are not allowed to transfer costs from large users to others. In fact, the opposite is what happens. So the reality on the ground is the PUCs do their job fairly well, but they don't build things. They simply approve what it is the utilities propose to build. And a utility will only propose to build if it's got bona fide applications from large load customers who have the financial wherewithal to step it up, which is just what Mars was talking about, right? But it helps. Symbolism always helps. Maybe in what we discussed earlier, it'll help to address a lot of the fears, uncertainty, and doubt on the part of a public who's afraid bad things are going to happen. So let's reassure them. Let's show top-down, state-down mandates for the state public utilities commissions and utilities to do what it is they are required to do by law.
If I could, I just want to interject, though. I think what we're heading towards is continued, let's call it political or social risk, right, in this space between the development of these large infrastructure projects and the public that has to live next to them, right? So we need to do a really high quality job. And I have to say, I think that most of the RTOs do not do a great job in their decision making today, need a lot better reform internally. I think PJM is a great example of this. Increased transparency, increased and more clear rules of the road. Similar to the utility model, right? Yes, the rate base requirement, fair and justified rates are important, and that goes a lot of the way. But we've seen gold plating of the wrong investments for decades at this point. So we need a better model that points these investments that the private sector and communities are collectively trying to make towards the projects that are actually going to have the highest good for everybody involved, right? That we have never done that well. We need to do that better. Or this sort of top-down perspective that the administration is sort of taking, I think, could really backfire on us if we're not careful. So I think there's a lot of inherent risk here that needs to be properly managed.
And at the local level, when you think about siting, I was in South Dakota, as I said last week, and there's a lot of open land in South Dakota. There's only 1 million people that live there. And there are communities in South Dakota that don't want a data center at all, to your point. Sioux Falls, Rapid City, they don't want one there at all. Well, Meta, Google, OpenAI are not interested in building there, right? Land prices are too high, and there's plenty of communities that will welcome with open arms a data center that generates $1 billion of investment and the employment of construction, hundreds of jobs paying 6 figures to high school grads, and massive relief on lower property taxes. So those communities want the ability to attract a data center in a rural area where people are not living close to it. And in America, with our connectivity network on internet connectivity and our fiber backbone, we can build a data center anywhere in this country that serves users everywhere, right? So connectivity on electricity, lousy. Connectivity on fiber is good enough that we should just pick and choose the communities where a data center would be embraced by the locals.
Another challenge I wanted to talk about is the Trump administration seeking to cancel hundreds of solar and wind permits around the country right now. And Lindsay and Mars, I wanted to see if you could talk about how in the end this could backfire in tackling electricity affordability, because renewables are the fastest and cheapest resources that you can build right now. We can talk about interconnection challenges as well, and you can address that and even talk about co-location as well. Mars is a solution. But do you find this latest attack on renewables maybe incongruous with supposed affordability promises from this administration?
I think it's unfortunate that this administration has taken this stance, and as we've seen in recent reporting, like actively working within their permitting process to slow down the uptake of these projects. You know, the business community has spoken, I think, on this issue. The interconnection queues around the country in total, more than 90% of projects are renewables. And yes, there's some, just as there is with data centers, there are some phantom projects. But even if you discount that, I mean, these are the technologies that are going to be coming online for the next decade, right? These are the technologies that are going to power this data center additions, other economic opportunity, industrial users of all kinds around the country, and residential consumers. So it's a huge mistake to intentionally endanger these projects and to slow them down. It will have cost implications, as slowing any type of generation uptake in the United States and our electricity grid would have. So it's important that we stop, and this goes back to the permitting conversation, it goes to state decision makers as well as the current administration. We need to stop trying to pick winners here. Like, every technology that we can bring online is important for powering the grid. Again, we've defrayed these investments for so long. You got to build transmission, and you have to allow generation to come online as quickly as possible. So I think I'll stop there and let Mars talk about the other parts of the question.
Yeah, I think the last figure I saw was we're going to need 150 gigawatts of new incremental load by the end of the decade. That is an unprecedented pace of growth. Certainly, we've had load growth in eras past, but not at this scale and speed. And so in that environment, it really needs to be an all-of-the-above approach where we're not taking resources off the table. For our part at Google, we're focused on bringing new firm capacity to help meet new load. So we're working with a company called Fervo Energy on enhanced geothermal in Nevada that can bring always-on 24/7 power to meet new load growth. We've helped restart the Duane Arnold 600-megawatt nuclear facility in Iowa to bring that back online. We're working with a company called Kairos Power to invest in the next generation of advanced nuclear technologies. We have a 500-megawatt order book with Kairos, and there's more to come. So we're really focused on bringing incremental load growth, incremental resources to meet new load.
I mentioned earlier the study just put out by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC. They concluded that 2/3 of the planned additions nationally for generation are wind and solar. You said 90%. They're saying 2/3, but maybe it's a different denominator. But NERC goes on to say these are weather dependent and they lack essential reliability services like inertia and frequency response that would be provided by traditional synchronous generator. At the same time, FERC notes that we have 100 gigawatts of gas, coal, and nuclear that are scheduled to be retired over the next 8 years. You combine that together, and we don't have the 24/7 baseload that we need. So I'm taken back to 1979. I was a sophomore studying nuclear engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. And just a few miles up the road is a place called 3 Mile Island. And when that happened, the professor brought us all in. There were 12 of us in nuclear engineering and said, pick another field, because nobody's going to build a nuclear plant in the United States in your lifetimes. And we did. I went to computer science, and that worked out okay. But I am so glad to see what Mars said.
Yeah, it's
what
all
Meta
back
has
around
announced.
for you.
Let's bring it back around. Nuclear, and I would interested, Lindsay, in your view on whether you consider that to be a clean, not renewable, but a clean power.
No, 100%. I think there are so many solutions out there for energy technologies that will get us to a cleaner, again, better grid, that we should embrace all of them. And I'll just say, I think the PJM example that you used earlier is a great one. We are seeing, well, those of you who are developing projects are seeing increasing delays in ordering of gas turbines around the country, right? Oh, exactly, right? And it's gone from 5 to 7, who knows where it'll be. Again, the volatility of the price is another issue. So when you're planning these cleaner technologies, combination of storage with wind and solar or nuclear or geothermal, they're going to provide a set of solutions for large load for industrial consumers that will improve the quality of the grid, provide us better resilience, and also meet, from my perspective, an important piece, meet our climate goals, which so many companies that are in this space are highly committed to. So let's keep that going. Let's not lose sight of that goal. And we can do it. We can do it at the same time. Google is a great example, but there are many others out there too.
Well, and then another opportunity that could happen is this co-location of building a data center with your own AI, your own energy source, and then eventually you could power that and not be on the grid. But then if you eventually do get connected, you could be bringing power back onto the grid and be a contributor in the end. So could you guys all maybe address the opportunity that AI could be a net positive for the grid down the line? And even Tanya, talking about some of, you mentioned kind of the next generation of AI and data usage. Maybe we aren't relying as much on these data centers in the future, so. maybe the two on the end. We'll have you address the.
Maybe I can start on the co-location piece. So at Google, our preference, first and foremost, is to have new grid-connected load that is served by new grid-connected supply, and that we use the transmission grid to transmit the power, and that those resources are located where they are each most cost-effective. We realize that in the current environment with transmission constraints, that's not always possible. And so where we do have a need to be in a particular location, we will look also at co-located models. In those scenarios, our preference is still that the generating resources be front of meter so that it can dispatch into the grid, so that it can be a constructive and additive part of energy supply for that region. But ultimately, this is not our preferred solution. I mean, what it comes down to is for microgrids, you need to significantly overbuild the backup generation. Right. So if you're a fully islanded grid system, you need 100% backup capacity. By comparison, if you're part of a grid network, you generally only need somewhere between 10 to 20% because it's a shared resource across the grid. So this co-location pathway is certainly one that we think should be permitted. Companies should be able to pursue this, but it's hard to see for us how long-term American AI leadership can be built on a system where we have thousands of expensive microgrids. And that really gets back to the transmission permitting reform discussion and high-performance conductors, and really unlocking the capacity of the grid to build out a shared resource, to build out a robust American electricity system that can power growth, and that if we have the ability to build transmission with speed, data centers can be a part of that solution to drive down costs and build a reliable grid for everyone.
So if I talk a bit about the generation piece of all this, we have very limited opportunities for clean, firm technologies in the US that are ready to build like now. Nuclear takes an extraordinary long time to build. Advanced nuclear, I think, is very promising, but still, I would say at the startup stage. Geothermal energy, I think, similarly very promising. I think probably nearing commercialization, but still at a relatively small scale. Fusion energy, very exciting, but probably still 5 to 10 years out. And we need more of these clean, firm energy generation options in order to meet load growth as a whole for all the reasons that we've been talking about. I think what's exciting about how this administration is approaching the AI problem is that they're looking at both sides of the equation. They're looking at how do we bring more power onto the grid. They're also looking at how can we make the US competitive in developing and deploying AI solutions across the board, across various sectors of our economy. And the Department of Energy has been tasked with leading something that they're calling the Genesis mission, which is the signature initiative to develop and deploy AI solutions in science, energy, and national security. I think it's really exciting that DOE has been put in charge of this, because the agency, despite being called Department of Energy, has a very large role to play in those three pieces: science, energy, and national security. And today, actually, the administration announced the Genesis Mission Consortium, in which they're going to be establishing a public-private partnership to tackle solutions, AI-enabled solutions, on several key areas that will include topics like fusion energy and geothermal energy, nuclear energy, science. And so I think it's really critical that we don't lose sight of the necessity for innovation and those early stage investments in order to get us to where we need to go. We have a problem, an infrastructure problem that is here today that's very difficult, that we need to navigate. But looking forward, I think innovation and these types of investments are going to be critical to get us to where we need to be.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Looking towards the future, government subsidizing some of these efforts, particularly in the nuclear space, is something that could potentially speed it up. But yeah, exactly. Advanced reactors take so long to build, and we haven't even had one built in our country yet. So it's theoretical still. But I do want to give the opportunity for maybe 2 questions in the audience we have. Okay, I saw the last row with your hand up first. But
I'm Mark McCarthy. I'm with Georgetown and Brookings. Great panel, good discussion. You covered a lot of important issues. I have one quick comment and then a question. The comment is on the point that's been made by a couple of speakers that large load customers make rates cheaper for everybody. There was a study that said that it covered 2019 to 2024. They said that was only because there was excess capacity in the system. Going forward, that's not going to be true. And so regulators around the country are saying, how do we protect ratepayers now? And their answer is separate tariffs. Virginia put in place a separate tariff where they said, here are the costs attributable to the large load customers. They should pay those costs, 70, 80% of them. So my first question, is that a good way to go, separate tariffs? And the second question is, your idea that there should be some sort of control for possible stranded investment makes a lot of sense. So upfront charges to cover some of the initial investments and termination charges in case companies walk away from it, they both make sense. You seem to be in favor of it at Google. How widespread is that sense in the hyperscale industry? Do they say, yeah, we're all for that? Or is that something unique to you?
Well, I guess, I don't know if you could speak for everyone, Steve. You have a diverse membership, but
Responsible players in this space, all of the NetChoice members, understand they want to pay their own way. They'll try to bring my own power, which is part of what this notion of behind the meter, but Mars nailed it. There's no way that it makes that much sense for us to put generation behind the meter, because sometimes even an advanced nuclear and small modular nuclear has to be taken down for refueling or service. When that happens, we have to be connected to the grid for backup power, right? So bring your own power doesn't mean it's behind the meter. It could be bring your own power and pay for it to be part of the grid, which I think Mars's point. Large load tariffs are exactly what the state public utilities commissions are supposed to do, but we give it a new name now. We'll call it a large load tariff. We'll make a big deal about it and people will feel better, but it's already been the law. The capacity situation that you spoke of, the DOE study looked at every single state individually. And in truth, there were states that had adequate capacity to meet the data centers over that 5-year period. But right now, when there are shortages of power and you have to buy on the spot market, we have a terrible spot market on power between most of our utilities because it ends up being unable to serve from an area of the country where the sun may be shining, and you pay too much to get power from part of the country that doesn't have enough. That's not easy to fix, Mark.
thank you. I mean, I know we're at 12:30, so I think we may have to end it, but I want to offer our panelists, hopefully if people want to ask questions afterwards, hopefully you can stick around. I apologize, this was a really robust conversation, and thank everyone for participating, particularly our panelists. Thank you.